Hello, you're watching BBC World News. These are the headlines. The FBI says US voter registration information has been obtained by Iran and Russia as they try to interfere in the presidential election. Officials say that Iran has been sending threatening emails designed to intimidate voters. The government in Thailand has lifted the emergency measures it imposed a week ago in an attempt to end months of protests against the Prime Minister and the monarchy. Medical staff in Belgium say they've reached crisis point as almost 9,000 people test positive for COVID-19 every day. The Belgian government has warned that parts of the country could soon see a tsunami of cases. Also, Ireland and the Czech Republic begin a second lockdown. It's an attempt to prevent the country's hospitals becoming overwhelmed by the rising number of new COVID-19 cases.
Already cast their ballots. Trump and Biden will meet again Thursday night face-to-face. They'll appear in their second and final debate to try to sway those who've not made up their minds. Now to an update on the anti-government protests roiling Thailand. The country's prime minister says
flooding in the nation of Vietnam headlines today's show. I'm Carl Azus. Thank you for making us part of your day. October is part of the rainy season in the communist nation of Vietnam. But this year, precipitation has been particularly heavy. Meteorologists say the natural La Niña phenomenon in the Pacific may be to blame. Hundreds of thousands of homes are underwater. There have been some major landslides. The Reuters news agency reported yesterday that 111 people are dead and 22 are still missing. The president of Vietnam's Red Cross Society says the floods are some of the worst the nation has seen in decades. Everywhere we look, she says, homes, roads, and infrastructure have been submerged. Rescuers are bringing in supplies by air, sea, and land. The floods aren't just affecting lives, they're affecting livelihoods. About 40% of Vietnam's labor force works in agriculture, and the government-run news agency says more than 17,000...
We're exclusively reporting that Boeing is holding early talks with possible customers to gauge interest in a new single-aisle commercial jet. The potential new plane would carry between 200 and 250 people, somewhere between the troubled 737 MAX and the 787 Dreamliner. Nancy Pelosi and White House officials said further progress had been made toward a potential $2 trillion coronavirus stimulus package. But they've raised the possibility that a deal may not be reached in time for a vote before Election Day. The Senate Judiciary Committee plans to vote today on the Supreme Court nomination of Judge Amy Coney Barrett, though Democrats are boycotting the vote. And tonight, President Trump and Joe Biden square off in the final debate in Nashville. You can watch it live on WSJ.com at 9 p.m. Eastern. Asian markets ended broadly lower, and European shares were down in early trading. This, a day after concerns about U.S. stimulus talks helped to drive Wall Street lower. Investors today will be watching the latest weekly jobless numbers and existing home sales data. We also have quarterly earnings from Coke, AT&T, and Intel, as well as American and Southwest Airlines.
To lift the emergency decree in Bangkok if there's no violence.
The only way to a lasting solution for all sides is to discuss and resolve these differences through the parliamentary process.
Prayut indicated an extraordinary session of Parliament will be held Monday and Tuesday to discuss the demonstrations. Protesters scuffled with royalist groups on Wednesday. The demonstrators' demands include Prayut's resignation and reform of the monarchy. Protesters have flooded the streets in and around the capital for 8 straight days despite the emergency decree announced on October 15th. It bans gatherings of 5 or more people. The demonstrators say the government is using the decree to detain their leaders. An international NGO says the number of signatories ratifying a UN treaty to ban nuclear weapons may reach the required 50 mark on Friday. Kawasaki Akira of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, or ICAN, raised that prospect Wednesday during an online news conference.
If the treaty is enforced, it is expected that the use, production, export and import of those weapons will actually be significantly reduced and will be as close to zero as possible.
The UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons was adopted 3 years ago and would take effect 90 days after ratifications hit 50. So far, 47 countries have endorsed it. But nuclear powers and nations such as Japan that fall under the U.S. nuclear umbrella have not signed the treaty. They argue that nuclear disarmament should be a phased process. Security forces have opened fire on thousands of Nigerians protesting against police brutality in Lagos. Human rights group Amnesty International says at least 12 peaceful protesters were killed on Tuesday night at two large gatherings in the city. Protests have swept across Nigeria since a video allegedly showing police fatally shooting a young man went viral earlier this month. President Muhammadu Buhari has vowed to reform the police unit accused of involvement in the incident. However, protesters have continued to fill the streets. Lagos and several states are currently under curfew. While many protests have been peaceful, there are reports of violence. Protesters reportedly stormed a prison in a southern town on Monday, freeing about 200 inmates. Turning to the latest on the coronavirus. As the number of cases surges across Western Europe, the northern Italian region of Lombardy is introducing a nighttime curfew. The local government says starting Thursday, people will be banned from going out between 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. People who break curfew face a fine of at least $470. Residents in the city of Milan have mixed feelings about the situation.
It's natural to take preventive measures to avoid a total lockdown. I can put up with it for a short period of time.
I think the health system is better prepared now than in March and April. I'm more concerned about the impact on society and the economy.
Italy has been one of the hardest hit countries in Western Europe, with around 450,000 confirmed cases and nearly 37,000 deaths. The rate of infections had dropped during the summer, but numbers spiked this month. On Wednesday, daily confirmed cases hit a record, topping 15,000. There are concerns that strict restrictions will deal a fresh blow to the economy. Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte has said he wants to avoid another nationwide lockdown. Japan's health ministry says the number of pregnancies reported across the country fell sharply in May and July. The ministry believes many women may have avoided pregnancy due to the coronavirus. The health authorities say the amount of pregnancies reported in Japan from January to July dropped nearly 28,000. That's down 5.1% from the same period last year. The ministry notes the month of May saw the sharpest decline, 17.1% from a year earlier. The downturn for June was 5.4% and 10.9% for July. It's typical for women to report their pregnancies to local municipalities within 2 months of conception. The ministry says the number of women who became pregnant appears to be especially low during March and May, when the virus was spreading quickly across the nation. The authorities plan to strengthen necessary support measures, including online health guidance, to encourage new pregnancies. Organizers of the Tokyo Olympics and Paralympics next year have tested innovative ways to ensure a safe and secure games amid the pandemic. About 1,000 people took part in the test. Officials assessed devices to quickly measure body temperatures of spectators. In addition to non-contact thermometers and thermographs, officials tried temperature-measuring stickers. They're worn on the wrist and change color in response to body heat. This could save time, as temperatures can be checked while spectators wait for security screening.
We were able to try various methods and collect data on how much time each method takes and how much burden it causes. We'll discuss the matter with the Tokyo Metropolitan Government and municipalities to find out which method is the best.
Tokyo officials on Wednesday reported 150 new coronavirus cases. This brings the total number in the capital to more than 29,300. Nationwide, more than 95,000 people have tested positive, with 1,700 deaths. The European Union and Britain have agreed to return to the negotiating table to work out a post-Brexit trade deal. The talks stalled after the UK reacted sharply to the EU's call for compromise last week.
I believe that despite the difficulties, an agreement is within reach if both sides are ready to work in a constructive manner with the aim of compromise.
Britain's chief negotiator, David Frost, said on Twitter it will restart the talks on Thursday in London. The round is to last 4 days. The two sides have been negotiating a free trade deal since the UK exited the bloc earlier this year. They remain divided over fishing rights, government subsidies to businesses, and other issues. The transition period ends at the end of December, but the deadline is expected to be early next month due to administrative procedures. The biggest railway operator in Tokyo has announced it's going to shorten its daily services starting next spring. East Japan Railway Company says it's bringing forward last train departures by up to 37 minutes on 17 lines, including the Yamanote Loop line that links the capital's major transit hubs. The new schedule will come into effect in March. JR East officials cite two reasons for the change. One is the declining number of late-night passengers amid the coronavirus outbreak. In August, some lines saw a drop of more than 60% from a year earlier. Teleworking has become more common, and fewer people are staying in bars and restaurants until late. The officials also cite the need to improve conditions for maintenance staff who only begin work after the last train service ends. The workforce is graying and is expected to shrink by up to 20% in the next 10 years. Other railway companies are expected to follow suit as they face similar circumstances. Former residents of Russian-controlled islands claimed by Japan had the opportunity to pray for the souls of their ancestors buried on the islands. A chartered flight was arranged by Hokkaido Prefecture in northern Japan after an annual trip to the islands was canceled due to the pandemic. The original tour would allow people to travel to the islands without visas in order to visit their ancestors' graves.